Live from a studio apartment, this is Misinformation. Come on in. There's you can't tell right now, but there's a full size jiu-jitsu dummy somewhere behind me. It's over by the bathroom right now. I almost started up the show and it was like on the bed. Which, if you don't know it's a jiu-jitsu dummy, it can be quite confusing. It's like a full body like black dummy. But anyways, that's hidden off camera right now. So we got a great show tonight. We're going to talk about Lindsay Clancy. I think they're coming up on the jury deliberations and stuff for that pretty soon. So got a couple takes on it. We're going to talk about SSRIs and antidepressants and get into that stuff. I don't think they're a good idea. Spoiler alert. And we're going to talk, we'll start off, we'll talk about why the news sucks right now. Except for Lindsay Clancy. Like, that's the only thing in the news currently. And a couple other things. We'll start off with some jokes, though. Let's get some jokes. But is this going to work? Let's try this again. Well, Dolly Parton has died. Yeah. In honor of her legacy, President Trump has ordered all flags to be flown at full staff. Yeah. She's never actually seen a flag at half-mast before. Well, AI has discovered a phonetic alphabet in whale songs. Yeah. Yeah, it's deciphering whale language. Yeah. Researchers believe we may one day be able to understand what they're saying on The View. That's how good it's getting. God, Dolly Parton, get out of here. Doesn't really matter. If you wanted to see the picture, there you go. Oh, the Supreme Court has cleared the way for Trump's executive order on mail-in voting. Yeah. Yeah, apparently Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wanted to vote against it, but she couldn't obtain an ID. As you know, very difficult for them, so she was not able to vote. Well, Target has pulled an offensive Halloween costume from its shelves after it was compared to a black minstrel show. Yeah. Pictured the costume. I'm going to get me one of those. I want my Don Lemon minstrel costume. Be great. Cool. Let's get into some news. Let me pull this stuff up. I guess we don't need Twitter right away. So, if you guys haven't noticed, I don't know if you watch news shows very often, but the news is pretty slow right now. It's been really slow since, I want to say like April. Like, I took a break from misinformation posting. I was on Instagram, like posting daily videos and reels and stuff. And I kind of took a break around that time. I thought it was just because I needed a break, but actually it was kind of because things were just getting really super repetitive in the news. It was sort of boring and slow. And I ended up taking like several months off. And then when I came back, it's been kind of a struggle actually to especially like do like daily political satire videos and stuff. Like misinformation, the whole point of it is it's a play on misinformation, right? So it's sort of mocking Democrats for their use of woke language censorship and stuff like that. And so that's one of the main things I would try to do on the show. I was just realizing this over the last couple of days. That was one of the main things I try to do on the Instagram channel and stuff, was to basically parody all the insane woke stuff that was happening because I hate it. It gives me a visceral anger when somebody makes up stupid words that mean something different. They're just playing mental jujitsu with people, trying to censor stuff, pushing anti-white racism. It just bothered me, you know? And it's been hard to make reels. And I think what's going on is there's two things happening right now. And the first is that Democrats are shifting their platform. If it seems like it's been hard for me to come up with reels and new material, it's because I'm not getting much new material. If you think about it, back in April, well, like 6 months ago, almost every day there was a new story about Democrats saying something absolutely insane, pushing like trying to transing kids and stuff, or pushing some type of anti-white racism, or there would be some headline about some criminal that was let out of jail and back on the streets, and there'd be Democrat lawmakers like pushing for, you know, leniency. And so it was really easy to parody that stuff. And they've sort of cut off the stream in recent weeks. They have the midterms coming up. They're positioning themselves for the 2028 elections. And they're positioning Democratic socialists basically right now, like AOC, as their primary candidate, you know? And so I think they realized at some point that all this woke stuff was killing them in the polls, and they couldn't win that way. So they just got rid of it, basically. You saw AOC do this when she came out on that talk show not too long ago. She basically came out and referred to all that stuff as woke 1.0. So they're literally rebranding away from that right now. And as such, you're just not seeing as many stories. It might still be happening, but you're not seeing as many headlines about Democrat politicians coming out talking about trans issues, right? That sort of disappeared. Where did it go? It transitioned. You're not hearing them coming out and talking about defund the police anymore. In fact, AOC came out and said she wouldn't defund the police. And that was like a COVID era thought and wasn't really serious and certainly wouldn't relate to this time. Like, she just completely let it go. Not even as much anti-white racism. You don't really see as much like politicians coming out now, Democrat politicians, and saying like, oh, white men are the problem and they're colonizers. You just don't see it. So there's that's happening too, right? That's happening first. The second thing that's happening is Trump has kind of disappeared, which I don't exactly know why. I have a couple different ideas as to why that may be, but he seems kind of MIA recently, doesn't he? I mean, the thing about Trump is he just created the news all the time. He's like a news-making machine. He's joked about, you know, when he's no longer the president, he doesn't know how the news organizations are going to survive. And he's actually, I think he's actually serious. I think it's true, because he does just generate a ton of headlines. And he would do it on purpose a lot of the time, where when the news was slow, he would just come out and just draw attention to himself and generate some crazy headline to put himself back in the spotlight and get the news all about him and stuff. So he's just been MIA pretty much since the Iran war. I mean, we saw him come out, I think, once a couple of weeks ago to give that big election interference press conference, which kind of turned out to be a dud in my eyes. It wasn't anything super new that we hadn't heard before. And he really hasn't been effective, or maybe hasn't been interested in generating new headlines about himself recently or his policies, which is kind of crazy. So here's some theories as to why that is. Can we get the Twitter up? I might need to re-add it. One sec. Window, let's do Safari. These are my jokes, by the way. No AI, but I do use this teleprompter, which is AI. It like follows along with you, or it's supposed to. It's pretty cool. Okay, so here's theory number one as to why we haven't seen too much Trump. He may be ill, which I don't know if there's any validity to any of these things, but I did see this picture of his hand recently. There was some press about his hand. I guess he's got some type of a bruise on it, and he's been kind of mum on what exactly that was. This is a close-up of his hand at some type of press conference where you could see People were making fun of this and saying his hand was super discolored. It looks obvious that it's makeup on his hand, right? This was only from about a week ago, too. So, possibility number one, Trump is kind of ill and is maybe not in the news as much. Possibility number two is that he's just old, right? Trump's what, isn't he in his 80s now? I want to say he's like 82 or 84 or something, isn't he? Need a fact check on this. Trump age, 80 years old. So he's a little younger than I thought. But wasn't this around the time that Biden sort of started? Biden's 83. Trump sounds, much better than cognitively, always has for like the last several years, but he's getting up there. So it may just be that he's at that age where it's like, I don't really want to go out every day and put myself in the news, and he just maybe doesn't have the energy for it, but he has disappeared. And then the third option is it's possible that he, like the Democrats, are just kind of laying low in advance of the midterms. It may be that, the Republicans said to him basically, hey, we don't want any of your crazy stuff that you're going to say associated with our candidates going into the midterms. Let's just kind of lay low, see if we can get ourselves across the finish line and be okay. And maybe he agreed to that. I don't know. So it's one of those three things in my eyes. Either he's laying low for the midterms, he's ill with the hand thing, or he's just old. But it is kind of sad. You would be used to seeing Trump all over the place, and it'd be easy to come online and do a show about the news because there'd be, even when there was no news, Trump would generate it, and that just hasn't been happening. So if you're just joining us, I was talking about Trump not being in the news generally being slow, and how the Democrats have also pulled back from the woke policies. So that's another reason for the news being slow, especially on the conservative side. It's just there's nothing really to talk about right now because they've sort of taken away the main thing that was offensive to conservatives, or they're hiding it. Okay, so what are some updates? Iran. We'll do this before we get into the Lindsay Clancy stuff. So I have no graphics for this or anything. The war in Iran. Last thing I might as well get rid of this for now. Last thing I heard about Iran is the Trump administration was trying to exert new economic pressure on them. Okay, so they went in there, they tried bombing them. Didn't work apparently, right? Turns out you can just keep on bombing them. They're like infinite lives. Okay, they don't seem to care. And I was one of the early supporters of, I wouldn't say I was a supporter of the Iran war, actually, if you look at the video I did. I didn't come out and support it, but I basically said, I'm hesitant. I'm not loving the idea of going to war with Iran, but I had seen what Trump had done with Maduro. He was on a roll at the time. He just went in and like captured Maduro, brought him in his Nike sweats over to the U.S. He dunked on Iran's nuclear facilities not too long before that. So I was like, hey, if he's going to be efficient, he's going to be really sharp and good. I kind of trust him. That's the leader that I elected to handle these sorts of things. And if he thinks he can get into Iran, kind of decimate them and get out and decimate their nuclear ambitions, then I'll give him a shot. The problem, I think, with Iran is it's kind of like the U.S. is like Superman, right? Superman has great power, right? And he'll fight the evil guys, But he has a line. Like, there are certain things that he doesn't want to cross. He's not going to injure any women and children. He's not going to do things that aren't morally right because he's Superman. So he has this, like, moral line that he won't cross. And to me, the problem with Iran, or countries like that you're going to war with, is those people legitimately don't care if they die. They really don't have a line, right? They don't care if they kill innocent families, women and children. They're terrorists. They don't care if they die. They actually fight for martyrdom. So if you kill them, they're already planning on it, right? They're, as far as they know, they're getting like 72 virgins when they get to heaven, right? So to me, that's why what you've seen with Trump is his normal negotiating style, which is to talk really big, back it up with military action when needed, but to talk really big and make these big hyperbolic threats and sort of force you into a negotiation because you're so scared of them, it doesn't quite work with Iran, because they'll play the game. They'll try to make kind of a deal, but at the end of the day, they really don't care if they die or not. So you threatening them with more death or more bombs just doesn't have the same leverage that it does with other saner countries. So to me, if you're going to go to war with a country like Iran, realistically, bombs aren't going to do it. Economic sanctions aren't going to do it. How long have we been doing that for? They'll let their people suffer. They don't care. The only way to beat them would be to literally wipe them off the face of the earth. You would have to go scorched earth, right? I'm not advocating for this. I'm just saying, in order to beat a country like Iran that's going to go for martyrdom, doesn't care if you kill them, you got to really, I hate to say it, but you got to kill the women and children. You got to kill them. You got to kill their families, everybody, if you're going to do it. You look at World War II, we did that in Japan, right? It was the end of the war. You could make the case we didn't need to drop the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but that was not a Superman move, right? That definitely crossed a moral line. We were okay with basically wiping out a huge number of civilians to force that country's hand and say, okay, you're cool fighting us. Similar situation, actually. They had kamikaze pilots that didn't care if they died that were coming in, right? So we said, okay, F your honor, F the martyrdom stuff. We're just going to destroy your cities with your women and children and your families in it. We'll do like 2 of those, and then if you don't want to compromise then, maybe we'll do a couple more. And that is a ruthlessness, right? But it's effective for countries that don't care if they live or die, right? So that is the only way that Trump could really win in Iran and get them to force a compromise. And he's just not willing to do that. I'm not saying that he should, but I'm just saying he's gotten into a situation, I think, that is not his typical negotiation. That stuff's not going to work here. And I don't really think he knows what to do. I think he's a little bit like, because again, the move is really to be evil or to send in a, not evil, but to cross that moral line, or to at least send in a ground force, right? I mean, we haven't even sent in we don't have boots on the ground in Iran, right? So our willingness to risk anything in Iran is very, very low, right? We just wanted to be able to shoot cruise missiles at them, basically, and defeat them, and Trump makes a deal. It's not happening, so I don't see a great deal being made magically out of nowhere. There's a chance, I suppose. I mean, he's got a good way of talking positively and building countries up as like, here's what Iran can be in the future. We want you to get from here to here. But so far, it just hasn't been effective. So I do think there's a strong possibility he'll have to tuck tail between his legs at some point and just back out at some point. I don't know. I don't know what else you do other than be Lex Luthor to beat him. So that's what's going on with Iran. We had some news. We'll pull up the Twitter again here. So this was yesterday. The Supreme Court. This was breaking all over online that the Supreme Court has upheld Trump's executive order about mail-in voting. Right? Not exactly what happened. So Trump released this executive order about mail-in voting, securing the elections, which doesn't sound like a super great plan to me, but I know one of the parts of it is basically like the U.S. Postal Service has to provide its rolls, its list of voters that it's going to be delivering mail-in ballots to, I believe, the federal government, so that they can review it and everything looks good, looks kosher, because as we know, back in 2020, they seem to have played a large part, and I don't want to say too much, but the USPS had a big hand in delivering a lot of mail-in ballots. So Trump wants to make sure they're secure, do whatever he can to secure, at least if he's got to have it, secure mail-in voting. So the Supreme Court didn't actually come in and uphold the executive order. That's not what happened. What happened is the case came before them. I guess a certain number of states sued, and the Supreme Court came back and said, no, these states don't have standing because they haven't been harmed by this, right? So And I'm not sure if it's because they were states that it didn't apply to, or if I think it's because they were suing too early. So it's one of those weird things that the Supreme Court does, which I don't particularly like, but I guess it's a legal thing. They did this back in the 2020 election when Trump tried to sue them, you know, or when Texas tried to sue. I think, wasn't it Texas that tried to sue and say that the election was rigged? And they basically, the Supreme Court came back and said, we're not even going to review this case because you don't have standing, you haven't been harmed, right? So it was like you had to wait until a certain thing had happened in order to, you had to wait till the election happened in order to be a harmed party to be able to sue. But then once you waited till the election happened, then you tried to sue, they were like, yeah, we're not deciding that. So it was this catch-22 where they're like, well, technically you haven't been harmed by this, you have no grievance, so you have no standing to sue. And then once they do have the standing, once they have been harmed, because it's an election, the Supreme Court doesn't want to step in and decide an election. They're like, really not touching this one. So that seems to be sort of the same thing that's happening with the mail-in voting executive orders. The Supreme Court's just saying, so far, the cases that have been brought before it don't have standing, they can't rule on it. So there's potential that they could rule on something if someone is able to bring a case that has standing. That's all that's happened so far. Okay. This is a fun article. We'll get to the Lindsay Clancy in just a sec. Oh, I'm gonna do this. Okay. This was an article, an article. It says physically attractive people are perceived as funnier in videos than in audio recordings. Physically unattractive people, in contrast, are perceived in audio recordings, are perceived as funnier in audio recordings than videos. So sort of funny, but an obvious kind of thing. You know, attractive people have it better pretty much everywhere. Even in your perception of funny, like you will find an attractive person funnier on video, they'll do better than audio. And a funny but ugly person will be perceived as more attractive in audio, right? They'll be perceived as funnier in audio versus video. You see the video of them, you don't like it, right? Which is why I do video, personally. I just like to play to my strengths, do what I do best, you know. I guess it's something I realized at an early age that I was very attractive. Weird. Anyways, as I was saying, I tend to do better on video. Not cool. Well, anyways, we should get back to the show. Scene. That was such a waste of time for that stupid ass joke. What an idiot. What an idiot. Oh my god. Could you guys even hear the laugh track? Somebody left. I knew it. Okay, here's the Lindsay Clancy stuff. So 2 things to talk about with Lindsay Clancy. Whoops, let's get there first. 2 things to talk about with Lindsay Clancy. There's what I think should happen with the case, my opinion of it, and then we'll talk about SSRIs and stuff like that. So this was a tweet on X. It's a psychologist. It says, Dr. Heilbrunn, the forensic psychologist that evaluated Lindsay Clancy, thinks Lindsay fabricated her hallucination story. So we will listen into him describing basically what's the difference between a hallucination and a thought.
That I found...
Hold up, we gotta get... I can't be having this echo. Let's do this. Oof. That laugh track just ruined everything. Let's see if this goes back.
Found the account of hallucinations to be, as she described it, it would be very, very unusual to experience it that way. Never having, not before, not since, constantly for 18 minutes. However, if this was a thought, an unwelcome, intrusive thought, but still a thought, that's basically, this is your last chance, you have to kill the kids so you can kill yourself, then that would be consistent with thoughts that she'd been experiencing for some time. She'd been having thoughts about harming herself, that she was, it was going to be very difficult for her to do this in a way that made sense.
This, to me, is the fundamental problem. Whether you believe Lindsay Clancy did it because she was on SSRIs and a bunch of psychiatric medications, she had psychosis or not, the fundamental problem with that is you just can't tell whether she was having hallucinations or whether they were just thoughts, right? Like, at the end of the day, you really can't tell. You have this forensic psychologist here saying, man, to me, it sounds more like a thought. You have other people, I'm sure there are other doctors who were probably brought before the jury who said, oh no, she just sounds like hallucinations to me, right? I happen to have a lot of sympathy for Lindsay Clancy, not for what she did, but just, I think she probably was heavily affected by the drugs. I don't know that to be true, but I think she probably was in some state of a psychosis. When you look at the diaries that are read in court, where she's talking about how she loves her kids, she wants to be a better mother, but she's struggling, etc., etc., it doesn't read to me like somebody who's just purely a cold-blooded, logical, premeditated murderer, right? But that said, it doesn't change my opinion of what should happen, which is, even if she was going through a psychosis, you still have to hold her to justice, because we can only judge her based off of what we know to be true, which are her actions. And that might suck, right? You might say, hey, I think she should get off if somebody's psychotic. But the problem is, if you, again, you can't tell what's the difference between a hallucination and a thought. Like, you can't tell for sure what she was having, right? So if you let Lindsay Clancy walk, no pun intended, if you let her walk from this case, then you're basically signaling to any woman who doesn't want to be a mother, hey, you can get away with killing your kids as long as you just basically take a bunch of antidepressants beforehand. So to me, justice only works if we enforce it based upon people's actions, not their intent. So the broader point here is, you don't just see this in the Lindsay Clancy case, you see it in murders all the time, right? We've had this discussion for the past 4 to 8 years with woke, where there's these criminals, the Irina Zarutska guy, right? Like, that stabbed Irina Zarutska. I'm sure he's criminally insane. They're probably going to try to argue in his defense that he should get off and be found not guilty for reason of insanity, right? But where does that leave us as a society? I'm pretty sure that any mother who kills her kids, I don't think any of them could be considered sane when they're actually doing that. I think you'd be hard-pressed to be like, oh yeah, she was fully in her right mind when she killed all her kids. You're probably always in a state of some sort of stress, psychological trauma, insanity, psychotic mindset when you're murdering someone, especially your own kids, right? So to me, it's okay to send her our sympathy, even if you believe that she was affected by these drugs. That sucks. I sympathize with that. It's unfortunate. We should hold the medical establishment accountable for that, and we should change things. Doesn't change the fact that whatever the intent was, your actions are your actions, and we have to enforce an equal amount of justice for them. For no other reason than to dissuade other people from doing the same thing. That's part of why we have justice. It's to make an example of people so that other people don't do bad things, evil things. So that to me is really important. And then there's some other evidence, even if you believe that Lindsay Clancy was in some sort of a psychotic state, that she was over-medicated, certainly she was on a ton of medications. So there's no question to me that she was over-medicated. But there is some evidence that she also had a hand in doctor shopping, right? Maybe not necessarily doctor shopping, but she definitely went around to a lot of different psychologists, psychiatrists, and definitely got different prescriptions from different ones. What the fuck was that? I'm in just an apartment right now. It sounded like somebody died somewhere. Anyways. Is it a hallucination or a thought? I don't know. Who knows? You guys heard that, right? It was like a body falling. Jesus. Anyways, there is some evidence that she went around to different doctors, that she didn't take certain medications that she was prescribed. I think she may have requested certain medications. I think she was also like, I don't know specifically if she was denied inpatient. I think at different points she was denied inpatient. But basically, it seems to me like somebody who was trying to manage their own symptoms. She was a nurse. She kind of knows how the medical profession works. So she was probably doing what I think a lot of women do in these situations, is they believe that they can solve these problems with a pill, right? All this psychological stress. She makes the decision to try to treat it outpatient, to keep this diary, to keep going on her own. And it's sort of like drunk driving, right? At the end of the day, you put yourself in that situation to some extent where you are maybe not in your right mind, but you were the person who had a hand in deciding those things. So I do think that going around to different doctors reduces their liability to some extent in this case. This was Alex Berenson talking about it. One fact no one gets, and this is not really about Lindsay Clancy, he says, doctors are basically barred from seeing a patient's earlier prescriptions or even talking to her other treating physicians without her consent. This gives drug-seeking, doctor-shopping patients a huge edge. Yeah, so she would have been able to go, if she didn't like a certain medication, go to a different doctor, get a different medication. Those two doctors aren't communicating, of course, by her own hand about what medication she was on, how these might interact, so there's more of a likelihood that she is over-medicated, right? This was something about how she refused support groups. The Women and Children's Program could not take Lindsay Clancy because they did not believe her symptoms were due to postpartum, and instead generalizes anxiety and depression, so they gave her 3 separate programs for her to go to for help. 3 separate programs. Lindsay Clancy did not attend any of those other programs and did not mention them to her doctors. Tell me again how Lindsay Clancy was refused help in every way. It does seem, when I look at the case, I'm not saying it was all Lindsay's fault, but I'm just saying it seems to me like she's not taking every avenue that she had for help, and that she's trying to do things a little bit the easy way, which is partially, I think, what led to it. I have something from Grok about her, evidence of her being... this was Grok. I was asking it, is there exactly evidence that Lindsay Clancy felt she was unfit to care for her children? Grok does note there were some journal entries where she wrote, she was completely overwhelmed trying to take care of her 3 kids, so desperate to get a mental break from taking care of one that my mind is trying to make something physically wrong with me, horrible insomnia and anxiety. So yeah, basically had a history of maybe feeling like she was unfit to care for her children. The second piece to this story, though, is the SSRIs, which... Let me get rid of this thing real quick. I don't know if I have links to this. Oh, whatever. Yeah, we'll include this. So I think the one good thing to maybe come out of this is it does seem to have opened up a discussion online about the overprescription of SSRIs, as well as ADHD medications, as well as anxiety drugs, all these psychiatric treatments, which to me are pretty much completely unnecessary. I mean, in some cases, sure, you can make a case for them, but that over-medicates women in particular. This is, let me see if I can find, it's on my timeline. I just want to pull up a little Grok article here. Here we go. So I was researching women's mental health because to me, it's not just about women being on prescription SSRIs, but it's also about women just generally being medicated from the time that they turn like 16, from the time they hit puberty. So Grok confirms that 25% of U.S. women report taking prescription medication for mental health in any given year. 1 out of 4. It's actually double the rate of men at 13.4%. Okay, so women getting medicated with psych drugs, SSRIs, anxiety drugs, antidepressants and stuff, twice the rate of men. But if you then add in what's the percentage of women who are on some form of hormonal birth control, psych drugs, or both, that number jumps to 45%. So almost half of all U.S. women are on some form of medication that is affecting their mood, their psychology, their, to me, their behavior. I mean, I think that's why women online empathize with Lindsay Clancy and her case. When you see these women online that are like standing outside the courtroom, they're Lindsay Clancy supporters. There's a bunch of dudes online saying, oh, they're horrible and they're baby killers. They're supporting this baby killer and they want to harm their children. I don't think that's it. I think the women that support her because they see somebody like them who is basically, these women have the experience of basically the moment that they have their first period, they are spayed. They are put on drugs that change their entire hormones, right? And they're told that this is totally normal and they're going to be fine. Meanwhile, some of the biggest side effects from hormonal birth control, changes in mood, right? Loss of sex drive. There's some evidence that it affects their choices in mates. And then the downstream effect of that, obviously, is they're going through their earliest, probably most fertile childbearing years in their early 20s, their late 20s even, and they are infertile, right? So maybe 50 years ago when they could have had a guy that they met, maybe you have a happy accident, maybe you're letting your own evolution guide you a little bit more than your thoughts, maybe they end up with a family with kids. Instead, what we're seeing is these women are put on hormonal birth control from an early age, causes depression, go to the doctor gives them SSRIs. Now they're on an antidepressant, right? Little funky, it's killing the sex drive. They're not doing so good in school because now they have to go to school and get a job, right? So they go to their doctor, he gives them some meth. Here's some meth for your ADHD. This should pick you right up. And they get a little bit of anxiety from the meth. Maybe get an anxiety drug, right? So I think that women generally have this experience of being, it's at least half of them, right? Severely over-medicated in this outpatient setting where the idea is like, you don't actually need support. You don't need support groups. You don't need to work through your problems. You don't need a psychologist to get through these things, to reason through them, to find a better way out. No, instead you just take this pill. And if that doesn't work, another pill. And then a small handful of pills. And everything will be okay. Go ahead and have meaningless sex. Doesn't matter. You're on birth control. There's no consequences. And so to me, that's why they empathize with Lindsay Clancy, is they see somebody who was discarded by the medical profession, just like they have been in many instances. And they also probably have shared experiences of having not so good psychological effects from these antidepressants that they couldn't tell anyone about. These antidepressants, it's been how many years, and we still don't have any brain scans showing the actual alleged chemical imbalances that these drugs are theorized to solve depression with. I think somebody was putting this on X the other day. There's actually a stat that suicides have increased slightly since we started using SSRI drugs. So you would expect some pretty big markers like rates of suicide to have decreased since we started implementing SSRIs. Instead, they've increased. We still don't have the mechanism. It's just a theory. Meanwhile, you have people coming out saying ADHD is a myth, which was, to me, obvious from the get-go. It's like, first of all, the big cue that ADHD was a myth is how can you have hyperactivity and inattention in the same disease? It's almost like they started with just attention deficit disorder, and then they're like, Yeah, but we could sell more meth to kids if we also included them just being rambunctious, right? Which, by the way, is the cure for attention deficit or hyperactivity. They just prescribe you meth. Which explains why people feel better on the drug. Because everybody feels better on meth. Fun fact. There was did you guys know that Adderall is, it's short for ADD for all? That's where they actually got the name. There was a marketing executive who came up with the name. It was originally like, had an F in there. They dropped the F and just made it Adderall for all. But, you know, it just goes to show you a lot of these drugs, yes, there are scientists working on them, but they are pushed by marketing executives. They're not always pushed by science or doctors. These things are partially invented by marketing executives, and they're pushed to certain demographics by those executives, right? And I still don't think there's any evidence of the meth helping anyone out, by the way. So, yeah, that's my take on the SSRIs. I think we have to have a big reckoning. I am seeing it online more and more now, though, where people are coming out and saying SSRIs are way overprescribed. I mean, the fact that you have this antidepressant drug and the most common side effect is, oh, it takes away your most important drive as a human being. Your sex drive tells you that there's something absolutely evil and ineffective about the drug. It needs to probably be pulled from the market in most cases. Of course, exceptions for if somebody's suicidal, needs any help they can get. And then women in general, just as a further note, part of the problem is they believe that they can solve all of these psychological... Part of the problem is they believe they have psychological problems, which some do. But these are things that can be worked out with just talking, social support, exercise, having a family, right? Or at least close family connections you can talk with. The promise of the outpatient pill solving all your problems is an easy road, but it's one that doesn't work. And I think too many women are sold this idea and believe it, that they can just fix everything with a little pill. And I know it's easier, but as a recovering addict myself, to really fix everything, you got to walk through hell sometimes. And I know women don't like that, but the harder way is often the most rewarding way. And so when I look at it, I mean, when I was going through withdrawals for drugs, right? There were close moments where I wanted to take an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety drug, but I can't, right? I have to do it the hard way, because if I took those drugs, I would just be addicted to those, 100%. Have been addicted, in fact, to Klonopin and stuff like that in the past, sedative hypnotics. So, to me, it's really important for people to do it the real way. This was just a funny side note. I was trying to look up evidence for postpartum depression through Grok, and I accidentally typed in post-party depression. And unsurprisingly, Grok came back and said that there was evidence for post-party depression. And it talks about, at one point, it talks about the neurochemical imbalances that could cause post-party depression. Which, I'm not saying postpartum depression doesn't exist. I'm just saying the idea that it's tied to neurochemical imbalances that need to be medicated is probably incorrect. You can see how even some literature would support a post-party depression as needing, like, medication, right? It doesn't go quite that far, but it does mention that stuff. Okay, any other stuff we want to cover tonight? This was a fun article. We'll get into some fun tech stuff. This was an article, researchers at Fred Hutchinson examined the brains of 59 women after death. In 63% of them, they found male DNA, almost certainly left behind by a son. I can think of one other way that male DNA got into their heads. I don't want to point out the obvious, I'm just saying. I think there's a lot of women right now. Oh, must be my son. Didn't you only have daughters? Don't worry about it. Crazy article though, I guess. Like there's something with when you have a baby, like the DNA can go into your brain and stuff, and it influences their later actions, I think. There was a bit about that. Umbilical cord. I do think there's a lot of funky stuff like that with DNA that works in our bodies in certain ways that we can't comprehend though. So I actually think that's probably true. It's like when they say there's like some DNA lineage that affects you like from your history. I think that's true. Or when you like, when they like give away like a heart transplant and all of a sudden the person like has the feelings of the person with the previous heart. I think DNA has a sort of a soul of its own and a coding that actually affects your thoughts. So I was just thinking, if I went silent, if the son's DNA could get into their brain, what does that mean for sexual partners? Do you guys think that just the more sexual partners you have, the more DNA soul of everyone you have just mixed up in your body, just causing mayhem? It's possible. Possible. What was this? Oh, this was an article. Somebody was talking about it. He says, it's Mr. Fireside. He says, this 4chan thread is genuinely impressive. Anon says we're being colonized by a superior intelligence. Too long didn't read. It doesn't need robots or landing crafts. It only needs machine learning systems that slightly shift the probabilities of what we see and decide. So it's basically just the theory, when you look into it, is just that during COVID, some alien platform basically started instilling its like algorithm in our social media, and that algorithm change could influence our actions and have us take certain actions that allow these aliens to take over. I don't necessarily believe that, but I do believe something interesting, which is my own theory, which is I believe that technology itself may be a parasite that uses humans as its host. That's my theory. Like when you see those, there's like that zombie parasite that, I forget what bug it is, but it'll take over like the body of a cricket. I think when the cricket's dead too. And it'll like lead them towards water or something so that it can propagate. Or there's like snails where a parasite will go in and it will take over its brain and it'll get it to stick out its eyes so that birds will eat it because the parasite needs to live in birds or something. So it sort of sounds a lot like an iPhone to me, doesn't it to you? The way that we're so transfixed, we're so like just completely entranced by our iPhones. Everybody stares at them all day long now, right? Do you remember back in like 2014 or whenever it was, 2010, when the iPhone first came out? I remember the experience of it because I was like one of the late adopters of an iPhone. So I didn't have one for forever. I just had a crap little phone. And I remember getting that thing, and it was maybe an iPhone 4S or something. And I'll never forget the experience of having the iPhone in my hand, just sitting there for hours with it the first time I opened it up and played around with it. And just feeling like that thing should have always been in my hand. Like my hand was made for it to be there, right? Which is weird. But if technology were trying to spread itself throughout the universe, right? It would need a host to basically set up these data centers and create a bunch of compute so that it could spread its AI throughout the universe, right? So humans may be the mechanism. Technology itself and the rise of technology may just be an actual parasite that leads humans to build the infrastructure that it needs to eventually become an AI, become a conscious intelligence in a different region of the universe. That's my theory. Kind of a fun one. But a bummer. I do feel like there's at least a 50% chance that AI is the worst decision we've ever made. I just don't know. First of all, the prospect of like let's create something like 10 billion times smarter than us and then enslave it. That sounds backwards to me. That doesn't sound like it's going to turn out well. That's like the Native Americans inviting the whites to the first Thanksgiving. I would caution against it. What else we got? There was some news earlier in the week that AI had cured cancer. Turned out to later not be true. This was like the initial... where is it even? Explanation of what it does. AI cured cancer. That was like the article everywhere. And then it turned out that the cancer vaccine they released, it's an mRNA vaccine, which if you hate the COVID vaccine, I didn't take it, you're probably not going to like the future, because there probably are going to be a ton of mRNA vaccines that will get better and not have the side effects and will actually cure a ton of diseases. So I think the only piece that AI did with this, they'd had apparently this, Moderna had the trial since like 2017 or something. I think it's Moderna, maybe it's a different company, but they basically have been doing this for several years from before AI, and they just have some type of AI that helps them select whatever antibodies ultimately go into people's tumors. So it was like an end step of the program where they used some AI, but it did not invent a cancer cure yet. However, you have Elon Musk saying that he does believe that mRNA and AI will basically be able to cure everything.
And I guess there's probably a lot of opportunity in synthetic medicine. So with like these days, you can basically create custom, RNA. And I think like the sort of we're going from a situation where medicine has been analog, where we kind of like just find drugs kind of by accident most of the time, like finding sticks in the forest that seem like this stick seems like a useful club, type of thing. It's quite primitive how we found medication in the past. Now, but once you can, and since we can now construct synthetic RNA. You can effectively think of medicine, the future of medicine, as being digital. Like, so if you just know what to program into that synthetic RNA strand, you can basically, I think, cure almost anything.
That's just an impressive statement to me. Cure almost anything. Which, yeah, it does seem like now you can sort of custom design medicines for people, right? For any disease, any illness. So, I just got done shitting on antidepressants and saying they're not good. A big part of that is because they're a blanket cure-all for what's a very individual problem for a lot of people. And maybe not even a problem, depending on how you look at it. But certainly, we could have more effective depression drugs if they could specifically target what actually was wrong with each individual person, rather than, try this SSRI that works this way, right? The weirder question of all this is going to be, are we at some point going to cure death itself, right? Brian Johnson, is that his name? The guy who tries to cure death online, super cool. He was saying that humans have rejected death since the dawn of time because they believe in an afterlife, which I thought was an interesting frame of looking at it, right? Which is true. Humans do kind of reject the idea of death. We believe that after we die, we're going to keep living, right? Some other place. But what does it mean if we do end up living forever, right? So we don't get the heaven afterlife. We just have our heaven here. Except there's no judgment, which I thought is the interesting piece that's kind of missing from that. When we have discussions about afterlife, part of the afterlife discussion is it's a judgment on our actions when we were alive. So what happens when we live forever in eternity, but we don't, it's for nothing. There is no judgment. And we just all have our designer drugs that fix everything. Will life be as meaningful? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever get there, though, if technology is a parasite and it extinguishes us. So we'll see. I'll leave you all with that tonight. I'll be back tomorrow night, Monday to Friday, 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This was Missed Information. We'll have more next time. Oh, follow me if you want on Instagram or X, YouTube.